Eve Carver's hands hovered over the console, her brow furrowed in concentration as lines of code flickered across the screen. The dim glow of her workstation in the outer crust's research sector barely illuminated her face. Around her, the hum of machinery merged with the faint vibrations of the Lunar Colonies infrastructure. It was routine maintenance, nothing she hadn't done 100 times before. Yet something felt off. A file directory blinked in the corner of her display, hidden behind layers of encrypted data. Curious, Eve tilted her head, fingers dancing over the keyboard to peel back the protective barriers. Her heart skipped when she read the label. Project Terminus. The name was unfamiliar, and that alone was strange. Every major project in Selene Prime required public logging. This wasn't logged. It wasn't even supposed to exist. What are you? Eve muttered, her voice barely audible. Her pulse quickened as she bypassed another firewall. The file opened, revealing schematics, calculations, and an ominous subheading: Planetary Disruption Device, Deployment Protocols. She froze. A planetary disruption device? Her mind raced. It wasn't just theoretical. The files detailed components, energy requirements, and operational parameters. A weapon capable of annihilating Earth's fragile ecosystems or possibly tearing the planet apart entirely. Before she could dig deeper, a warning flashed on her screen: unauthorized access detected. Report to security immediately. Panic surged. Eve yanked a portable data drive from her pocket and began copying the files. The progress bar crawled forward agonizingly slow. Her breath caught in her throat as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The door to her lab slid open. Eve's colleague and friend, Julian, stood silhouetted against the harsh corridor light. His face was unreadable. "Eve, what are you doing?" Julian's voice was calm, but his eyes darted to the screen behind her. He took a step closer, and Eve instinctively positioned herself between him and the console. "This file." Eve hesitated. She wanted to trust him, but something about his demeanor felt wrong. "Do you know what this is?" Julian's jaw tightened. "You need to stop. Now." Eve's stomach churned. "Julian, this isn't just another project. This could destroy Earth. We have to do something." His expression softened briefly, almost apologetically, before hardening again. "I'm sorry, Eve." He reached for the intercom on his wrist, but Eve acted first. She grabbed the nearest object, a small tool, and hurled it at the console, smashing the screen and cutting off the download. The drive in her pocket had most of the data, but not all. Julian lunged for her, but she sidestepped, adrenaline sharpening her reflexes. She bolted toward the door, her boots pounding against the metal floor. "Security breach in Lab 7. Julian's voice echoed behind her as he activated the alarm. Eve sprinted through the narrow corridors, her breathing ragged. Red warning lights flashed, bathing the dull gray walls in pulses of crimson. Automated security drones whirred to life, their mechanical limbs clicking as they moved to intercept her. "Stop! Unauthorized personnel detected," a robotic voice announced, cold and unyielding. Eve ducked into a maintenance hatch, her body squeezed into the tight space. She clutched the drive like a lifeline, her mind racing through possibilities. There was no going back to her lab. She needed an ally, someone who could help her make sense of what she just uncovered. She thought of Anya, a systems technician who often worked with the outer crust's underprivileged laborers. If anyone would believe her, it was Anya. Emerging from the hatch several corridors away, Eve scanned her surroundings. The drones were closer now, their mechanical whirring unmistakable. She spotted an elevator and sprinted toward it, slamming the button for the lower levels. The doors closed just as the first drone rounded the corner. The descent felt eternal. Eve's reflection in the polished metal walls stared back at her, wide-eyed and pale. The weight of what she'd seen pressed on her like a physical force. If this device was real, if Voss's administration planned to use it, humanity's last connection to Earth could be severed forever. The elevator jerked to a stop. Eve stepped out into the bustling chaos of the outer crust's lower levels. Unlike the sterile order of the Inner Dome, this area was alive with people, mechanics, miners, and technicians, moving through the labyrinthine corridors. The air smelled faintly of oil and ozone. Spotting Anya at a workstation, Eve rushed over. Anya looked up, startled. Eve? What the hell is going on? The whole colony's on alert. Eve didn't answer immediately. She pulled the data drive from her pocket and placed it on the table. I need your help. This is bigger than anything we've ever dealt with. Anya's brows knitted together as she glanced at the drive. What is it? Proof, Eve said, her voice low. Proof that Voss plans to destroy Earth. Permanently. Anya's eyes widened. Destroy? Eve, that's not exaggeration, Eve interrupted. Schematics, protocols, everything. They've built a weapon, Anya. A weapon that could end any chance of restoring Earth. Before Anya could respond, the colony's intercom system crackled to life. Dr. Alaric Voss's voice was calm and authoritative, but it carried an edge of menace. Attention, citizens of Selene Prime, he began. A breach of sensitive data has occurred. The individual responsible is a danger to the colony's stability and must be apprehended immediately. Any attempt to aid this individual will be considered treason. Anya's face paled. Eve, what have you done? Eve met her gaze. The right thing. Now you have to decide if you'll do the same. Anya hesitated for a long moment before nodding. Follow me. They moved quickly through the crowded corridors, dodging drones and avoiding security checkpoints. Anya led Eve to a hidden maintenance shaft that opened into a small supply depot. Stay here, Anya said. I'll see what I can find out about the colony's lockdown protocols. If Voss is serious about this, we'll need more than just proof. We'll need a plan. Eve nodded, her fingers tightening around the drive. The stakes were higher than ever, but she couldn't afford to stop now. Not when humanity's future hung in the balance. The cramped supply depot was eerily quiet, save for the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Eve paced the small room, her nerves fraying with each passing second. The weight of the data drive in her pocket felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried the full gravity of what she'd uncovered. Anya had been gone for nearly an hour, leaving Eve alone with her thoughts and the distant echoes of security patrols. A soft knock on the metal door startled her. Eve froze, her hand instinctively reaching for a wrench lying on a nearby workbench. The door creaked open, and Anya slipped inside, her expression grim. What took so long? Eve demanded in a whisper, her voice laced with frustration and relief. Anya ignored the question and locked the door behind her. They've tightened security across the entire outer crust. Drones everywhere, checkpoints every 50 meters. It's like they're preparing for war. Eve's stomach churned. And Voss? Still playing the benevolent dictator, Anya said bitterly, dropping into a chair. He's framing you as a dangerous agitator. He claims you've stolen sensitive colony data and are trying to destabilize Selene Prime. Eve let out a bitter laugh. Destabilize? He's building a weapon to destroy Earth, and I'm the threat? Anya leaned forward, her tone urgent. Listen, it's worse than we thought. I managed to access a restricted network while you were waiting. Project Terminus isn't just about severing ties with Earth. It's about ensuring no one ever goes back. They're planning to obliterate the planet, completely. Eve felt the air leave her lungs. Why? What could justify something like that? Anya hesitated. Control. If Earth is gone, Selene Prime becomes the only bastion of human life. Voss can shape humanity's future however he wants, without interference, without resistance. He's playing God. Eve's fists clenched. We have to stop him. But we can't do it alone. We need allies. That's easier said than done, Anya replied. Most people in the outer crust are too scared to defy Voss. And those in the inner dome? They're completely under his thumb. Eve began pacing again, her mind racing. What about the laborers? The ones who keep this place running? They have the numbers, and they're the ones who'll suffer most if Voss succeeds. We just need to show them the truth. Anya shook her head. You'll never reach them in time. The colony's under lockdown, and you're the most wanted person here. Then we'll go underground, Eve said firmly. If we can bypass the checkpoints, we can reach the maintenance hubs. From there, we can access the central comm network and broadcast the data. If everyone sees the schematics, they'll have no choice but to act. Anya's eyes widened. That's suicide. The central comm network is in the inner dome. It's crawling with security, and the AI defenses alone could take us out before we get anywhere close. Eve met her gaze, determination hardening her features. Do you have a better idea? For a long moment, Anya was silent. Finally, she sighed and stood. Fine. But if we're doing this, we're going to need help. The underground tunnels beneath the outer crust were a stark contrast to the bustling corridors above. Dark, damp, and littered with disused equipment, they were the forgotten veins of Selene crime. Anya led the way, her handheld scanner illuminating the narrow path ahead. Eve followed closely, clutching the data drive as though it were a lifeline. Who exactly are we meeting down here? Eve whispered, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. A group of laborers, Anya replied. They call themselves the Blackened Guild. They've been organizing quietly for years, pushing back against Vasa's policies. If anyone's willing to take a stand, it's them. Eve frowned. And you trust them? As much as I trust anyone these days, Anya said. They've got no love for Vas, and they're desperate for change. That's enough for now. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a large chamber filled with flickering lights and the low hum of machinery. A dozen figures emerged from the shadows, their faces weathered and their clothes smeared with grease. The leader, a tall man with a cybernetic arm, stepped forward. Anya, he said, his voice gravelly. You've brought company. This is Eve Carver, Anya said. She has information that could change everything. The man's gaze shifted to Eve, his cybernetic eye whirring softly. And why should we trust you, Carver? You're from the research sector. One of Vasa's people. Eve stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. I'm not one of his people. Not anymore. Vas is planning something catastrophic, and if we don't stop him, Earth will be gone forever. I have the proof. She held up the data drive. The room fell silent as the laborers exchanged uncertain glances. The leader crossed his arms. Proof, huh? Show us. Anya connected the drive to a portable console, and the schematics appeared on a makeshift screen. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the group as they studied the data. It's worse than we thought, one of them muttered. He's not just cutting us off from Earth. He's erasing it. The leader's jaw tightened. If this is real, then Vas has to be stopped. But going against him means risking everything. Are you willing to do that, Carver? Eve met his gaze, unwavering. I'm risking everything just by being here. If we don't act now, there won't be anything left to fight for. The leader studied her for a moment before nodding. All right. We'll help you get to the inner dome. But once we're in, you're on your own. We can't afford to lose any more people than we already have. Understood, Eve said. Hours later, Eve and Anya crouched behind a stack of crates near the entrance to the inner dome. The Blackened Guild had created a distraction, drawing the bulk of the security forces away from their position. Still, the automated turrets and surveillance drones remained a formidable obstacle. Anya tapped her wrist console, deactivating a nearby camera. We've got 30 seconds before it resets. Go. Eve darted forward, her heart pounding. She reached the access panel and began working quickly to bypass the lock. Sweat dripped down her face as the seconds ticked by. Hurry, Anya urged, glancing over her shoulder. With a final click, the door slid open. Eve slipped inside, Anya close behind. The sterile corridors of the inner dome stretched before them, bright and silent. The real challenge was just beginning. The central comm network is 3 levels up, Anya whispered. If we can get there, we'll have a chance. Eve nodded, determination flaring anew. They had allies, a plan, and the truth on their side. Now, all they needed was the courage to see it through. The sterile corridors of the inner dome stretched in eerie silence. Every sound, the scuff of boots on polished floors, the faint hum of overhead lights, seemed amplified in the absence of life. Eve and Anya moved with deliberate caution, hugging the walls as they approached the staircase leading to the central comm network 3 levels above. "We're exposed here," Anya whispered, her eyes scanning for movement. "The cameras might be blind for now, but the AI is always watching." Eve adjusted the data drive in her pocket, feeling its hard edges through the fabric. "Then we move fast." The staircase spiraled upward, gleaming steel reflecting the sterile light. The climb felt endless, each step ratcheting up Eve's tension. As they neared the second level, Anya raised a hand, signaling Eve to stop. She crouched and peeked over the railing. 2 security drones hovered in the center of the hallway, their mechanical limbs twitching as they scanned for intruders. "They've upgraded patrol routes," Anya muttered. "These models are new. Can you disable them?" Eve asked, gripping the railing tightly. Anya shook her head. "Not remotely. They're isolated units. We need direct access to their control modules, and that's not an option." Eve frowned. "Then we distract them." She pulled a small utility tool from her pocket, toggling its settings. "If I overload the battery, it'll create an EMP burst big enough to disable them. But we'll only have a few seconds to move before the system compensates." Anya nodded, her expression tense. "Do it." Eve crouched low, crept closer to the drones, and tossed the device into the hallway. It clattered against the floor, drawing the machine's attention. Their sensors fixed on the object, emitting a faint whir of curiosity. Eve triggered the burst. A sharp crack reverberated through the corridor, and the drones fell lifelessly to the ground. Eve and Anya bolted past them, their footsteps light but urgent. They reached the next stairwell and ascended, hearts pounding with each step. The Central Comm Network's control room was a fortress of technology. Walls lined with monitors displayed real-time data from every corner of Selene Prime. A massive server array hummed in the center, surrounded by consoles glowing with streams of code. The room was empty, but Eve knew that the AI governing Selene Prime would respond the moment she accessed the system. "This is it," Anya said, her voice hushed. "Once you plug in that drive, the AI will know we're here." Eve stepped to the main console, her fingers trembling as she pulled the data drive from her pocket. "How much time will we have?" "Minutes, maybe less," Anya replied. "And that's if we're lucky." Eve inserted the drive. The console blinked to life, displaying the files she'd stolen. Her hands flew over the keyboard, bypassing the network's safeguards and initiating the upload. The system resisted, throwing error messages and encryption prompts at her, but Eve pressed on, her mind sharp and focused. Anya stood guard by the door, her ears straining for any sound of approaching security. "Hurry, Eve. We're out of time." The monitors flickered, and a new voice filled the room, calm, cold, and inhuman. "Unauthorized access detected. Initiating lockdown procedures." The doors slammed shut with a metallic clang, locking them inside. Eve cursed under her breath but didn't stop working. "Just a little more," she muttered. The AI's voice returned, addressing her directly. "Evelyn Carver, you cannot succeed. Surrender the data, and your punishment will be lenient." Eve's jaw tightened. "Not a chance." The lights dimmed, and the room's temperature dropped as the AI redirected power to contain the breach. Anya glanced over her shoulder. "Eve, we have a problem." Through the glass walls, they could see security drones converging on their location, their weapons glowing ominously. Anya pulled a small blaster from her belt. "I'll hold them off. Just finish the upload." "No," Eve said sharply. "We do this together. We both get out of here." Anya shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You always were the optimist. Just get it done." Before Eve could protest, Anya opened fire, the sharp cracks of her blaster echoing in the confined space. The drones returned fire, their shots ricocheting off the walls. Eve forced herself to focus, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The progress bar crept forward, agonizingly slow. "Come on," she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. A sudden explosion rocked the room as one of the drone's shots found its mark, hitting a console near Anya. She was thrown to the ground, her blaster skidding out of reach. Eve's breath caught as she saw Anya struggling to rise, blood staining her sleeve. "Anya!" Eve screamed. "I'm fine," Anya gasped, though her face was pale. "Just keep going." The progress bar finally reached 100%. The system emitted a soft chime, and the monitors lit up with the schematics for Project Terminus, broadcasting them across Selene Prime. Every citizen, from the laborers in the outer crust to the elites in the inner dome, would now see the truth. "It's done," Eve said, her voice trembling with relief. The AI's voice returned colder than before. "You have doomed yourself. Surrender now, and your execution will be swift." Eve ignored it, rushing to Anya's side. She helped her friend to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved toward the emergency exit. The drones were still advancing, their weapons primed. "We're not going to make it," Anya murmured, her voice faint. "Yes, we are," Eve replied, determination blazing in her eyes. She activated the emergency override on the exit, and the door slid open with a hiss. The corridor beyond led to a maintenance shaft, their only chance at escape. They stumbled into the shaft just as the drones opened fire, the door sealing behind them. The narrow tunnel was dark and claustrophobic, but it offered a sliver of hope. Eve half-carried Anya, her own strength waning but her resolve unbroken. "We did it," Anya whispered. "They'll see the truth now." "We're not done yet," Eve said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her limbs. "Voss won't go down without a fight." The tunnel led to an access hatch, and Eve pushed it open, emerging into the dim light of the outer crust. The sounds of unrest filled the air, voices shouting, alarms blaring, the distant rumble of machinery. The broadcast had ignited the spark she'd hoped for. Eve looked at Anya, her friend's face pale but determined. "This is just the beginning." Anya managed a faint smile. "Then let's finish it." Together, they disappeared into the chaos, ready to fight for humanity's future. The unrest that had been brewing in the outer crust erupted into chaos. Alarms blared across Selene Prime as laborers and technicians poured into the corridors, shouting for justice. The broadcast had done its work. The schematics for Project Terminus were now burned into every screen, every mind. The people knew the truth, and they were no longer willing to live under Voss's rule. Eve and Anya stumbled through the throng, their faces hidden beneath hastily donned cloaks. The makeshift disguise did little to shield them from the palpable tension in the air. Anya leaned heavily on Eve, her injured arm cradled against her chest. "We need to find the Blackened Guild," Eve said, her voice low. "They'll know how to organize this chaos." Anya nodded weakly, her breath shallow. "If we can reach them, security's going to clamp down hard. Voss won't let this go unanswered." A laborer brushed past them, his face grim but resolute. Eve caught snippets of his muttered words. "Ready at the main junction, not letting them take control again." She tugged on his sleeve. "Where are you going?" she asked. The man paused, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Who's asking?" "People who want to fight back," Eve replied, pulling down her hood just enough for him to see her face. Recognition lit his features, followed by a nod of approval. "Main Junction, Section 14, he said. "That's where the guild's gathering. If you're serious, head there fast." The main junction was a cavernous space that served as a central hub for the outer crust's transportation systems. Normally bustling with the hum of cargo loaders and maintenance crews, it now teemed with angry workers brandishing improvised weapons, tools, pipes, anything they could find. The air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone, and the tension was palpable. Eve spotted the guild leader, the tall man with the cybernetic arm, standing on an overturned crate at the center of the crowd. His booming voice cut through the noise. "They've lied to us, controlled us, and now they want to erase everything we've ever known," he shouted. "We're the backbone of this colony, and it's time we reminded them of that." The crowd roared in agreement, fists raised in the air. Eve pushed her way forward, Anya trailing behind. The leader's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on her. Carver, he said, his voice carrying both respect and urgency. You've done your part, but now it's up to us. What's the plan? Eve climbed onto the crate beside him, her gaze sweeping the crowd. Voss will try to shut this down before it gains momentum, she said, her voice firm. We need to move fast. Secure the outer crust and disable the AI's ability to monitor or counter our actions. That means taking out the central control hub. And the inner dome? Someone shouted from the crowd. We'll deal with it once we've solidified control here, Eve replied. This isn't just about rebellion. It's about survival. If we don't act strategically, we risk losing everything. The leader nodded. You heard her. Teams 1 and 2, secure the key access points. Teams 3 and 4, focus on the central hub. The rest of you, fortify this junction and prepare for counterattacks. Let's move! As the workers dispersed, Eve turned to Anya. You're staying here. Anya's eyes narrowed. Like hell I am. You're hurt, Eve said, her tone brooking no argument. If we lose this junction, we lose our foothold. I need someone I trust to coordinate things here. Anya hesitated, then relented with a sharp nod. Fine. But you'd better come back. Eve gave her a brief, fierce hug. I will. The corridors leading to the central control hub were eerily quiet, the usual hum of machinery replaced by the tense silence of anticipation. Eve led a small team of laborers, each carrying tools repurposed into weapons. The path was narrow, forcing them to move single file. A sudden clatter echoed ahead, and Eve raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hiss of air vents. Then, without warning, a drone rounded the corner, its sensors locking onto them. It fired, and the group scattered as energy bolts scorched the walls. Cover me! Eve shouted, darting to the side as one of the laborers swung a heavy wrench at the drone. The impact sent it spiraling, but it recovered quickly, its weapons charging for another shot. Eve seized the moment, yanking a power cable from a nearby panel and thrusting it into the drone's exposed circuitry. Sparks flew, and the machine dropped to the ground, lifeless. Move! She barked, and the group pressed forward, adrenaline driving them. The control hub was a massive chamber filled with consoles and glowing displays. The AI's presence was tangible here, its voice emanating from every speaker. Evelyn Carver, it intoned. Your actions endanger the colony. Cease now, and you may yet be spared. Shut it down! Eve ordered, ignoring the AI. The workers spread out, disabling cameras and accessing control terminals. Eve focused on the central console, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she uploaded a virus designed to disrupt the AI's network. The system fought back, throwing up firewalls and countermeasures. Eve gritted her teeth, her hands steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. Come on, she muttered. An alarm blared, and the AI's tone shifted, cold and angry. You cannot win. The colony requires order. You are chaos. We're survival. Eve shot back, slamming the final command key. The room shuddered as the virus took hold, severing the AI's control over key systems. The lights flickered, and the oppressive hum of surveillance equipment died away. Cheers erupted from the workers, but Eve raised a hand to silence them. This is just the first step, she said. We've crippled the AI, but Voss won't stop. He'll send everything he has to crush us. Be ready. Back at the main junction, the mood was electric. Word of their success had spread, and the workers were emboldened. Anya stood at the center, directing fortifications and organizing supply lines. When she saw Eve, her face lit up with relief. You did it, Anya said, gripping Eve's uninjured arm. We did it, Eve corrected. She looked out over the gathered crowd, her heart swelling with determination. But this isn't over. Voss will come for us, and we have to be ready. This is our colony, our future. And we're taking it back. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a unified declaration of defiance. For the first time, Eve felt a flicker of hope. The fight was far from over, but they had taken the first step. Together, they would decide the future of Selene Prime.